The world is full of change makers, those who see a problem to be solved and who take action. Together, these change makers can build stronger communities and a better world. But who are they, and how do they work together? I'm Michelle Shumate, co-author of Networks for Social Impact and the founding director for the Network for Nonprofit and Social Impact at Northwestern University. Students at Northwestern challenged me to answer these questions across 5 levels of difficulty. Let's dive in. I'm Michelle Shumate, she, her, hers, and I'm a professor at Northwestern University, and I'm here to talk about Networks for Social Impact.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Mosley. I'm a faculty member at the Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice at the University of Chicago. I'm excited to be talking to Michelle today.
So my research really focuses on how networks of organizations come together to make a bigger social impact, and most recently it's been featured in the book Networks for Social Impact, where we talk about a systems approach, meaning that we try to figure out how the whole is more than the sum of the parts when it comes to networks.
I study how nonprofit organizations can work together in ways that are more effective and equitable. I'm particularly interested in the ways that they collaborate around policy implementation and policy formulation. So what data do you think we should be looking at to optimize social impact, and how can we best use it?
So I think some of the data that we as researchers use are big government data sets. I've used state level education outcome data. I know you've used federal data on chronic homelessness. And that data is accessible not only to researchers, but to social impact leaders as well. But for most social impact leaders, they're not going to see those big needle moving changes in those data sets for some time. And so it's important that they are collecting data about their outputs as well, so that they can begin to see things like how many phone calls they've made, or how many doors they've knocked on, or they've begun to see how many clients of different geographies they're serving through some of their different programs, because that's where they can begin to get traction and demonstrate how their activities are adding up to that eventual geographic level social impact.
So is there a way to measure social impact? How would we know when we've achieved it?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I think as researchers we've struggled with. Sometimes researchers satisfice on this. They just measure network outcomes, right? So they look at satisfaction, or the number of members that a network has, or the amount of funding that they've attracted. But that's really not social impact, that's network impact. Social impact should be about the outcomes that the network wants to achieve, whether those be outcomes at the whole community level, things like moving the needle on educational outcomes, literacy or math scores or graduation rate, or if that's other types of policy outcomes like you've studied, like reducing chronic homelessness.
So how can researchers best collaborate on this moving forward?
I think that's been one of the areas that's kind of motivated us to write the book, is that we saw a lot of the research on networks for social impact scattered across multiple journals and different disciplines. There's a lot of researchers who are doing this work, but they're not talking to one another because they might be in a business school, and another one's in a public management school, and another one might be in a communication school, right? So part of the thing that I think that has to happen going forward is that across these different disciplines we have to come together and develop some shared language so that we can build on each other's findings. But more than that, I hope that this work that we're doing actually has a bridge built out to network leaders themselves. One of the things that I know I find when I'm talking to students or network leaders is they're not aware of all of this research out there on how to best structure a network to make a social impact. And I think that as academics who are studying this issue, we have a lot to say to the public about how to set up these networks best so that they actually move the needle on some of the biggest social issues of our time.
So when we think about these networks that are working towards social impact, you said, you really want to think about what these big outcomes are going to be. But are there ways that we can think about how the network operates together that might better lead to those outcomes?
That's a really great question. And one of the challenges I think that networks face in figuring out how to make a social impact is to make those connections. So we talk about it as their theory of change, which is really about how you translate network activities into those social impact outcomes. Sometimes networks do that in terms of project-based, where they're creating some kind of new program or service or building. Sometimes they do this in terms of catalyst, where they're trying to scale up some effort, some evidence-based practice that they knew worked in one place, and so it's really about dissemination. And other times they're really interested in what I know that you care a lot about, advocacy, where they're trying to generate a policy win, either through grassroots action or direct lobbying or through litigation. Sometimes they're interested in improving the quality of the programs and services of the organizations, and so they do that through learning. And when everybody gets better at what they do, you get a better social impact. And then probably the most difficult theory of change is really systems alignment, where we're bringing together organizations who do very different things, but we're figuring out how to reduce gaps in services and how to align programs so that you get more out of them. And in each of those cases, having a theory of change allows you to say, this is what we do as a network, but here's how it adds up to the bigger social outcome than you would see just by looking at our activities.
It was so interesting today to hear about how you're connecting outputs to network design, to outcomes, thinking about how researchers can collaborate, how we can bring in community members and partners. This work is so important and so needed, so thank you.
Thanks for coming. I'm Michelle Shumate, and I'm the author of Networks for Social Impact, which you can buy on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, from Oxford University Press, or anywhere that books are sold.